the states would have to come.
Well, the salt stuff or whatever, if we conform federally, the
Well, it's really hard
preliminary things
to
I heard from
find things and
revenue
print them out
is
and put them
$800
on
million increase in it.
I got the spray glue all over my house. Okay.
Yeah, because it's true.
And I think for all of us,
No.
business will
Okay, yeah.
but it's not gonna take a while. And on come February 1st, they're gonna have it. So I'm telling you, this is one you need to know. I'm gonna let them vote. I am gonna let them vote. This is Spencer. He is my dear friend because he's a Republican tracker who follows me everywhere. I've been disappointed in some of the editing he's done on me. I have invited them into every event friendly because everything I say, I would say anywhere else. But I would let all of you, because this is your space as a, I just wonder if the Republicans let me come down there and film them. What do you think?
I would hope so.
So, Deb,
If it's okay with you, it's okay with us.
Eric?
Well, we're always happy to see the trackers leave.
Down there, I'd say leave it. Yep.
Yeah. No, make yourself at home. Just tell everything you put down, make sure it's not video edited out, make sure you tell the whole story.
That's
Don't
right.
you think?
I believe that's
We
the
talk
best
to the
way.
whole citizens.
All right, go.
Here we are.
Think about it. And the thing is, some of those posters that we had during people had during the rally, it would be fun to gather them here, like in
He's a Republican tracker. I understand.
So I just followed the congressman.
You do as a.
Hi, folks.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Do you write
Nice to see you.
No, I do.
Hi, Sylvia.
I take video. The congressman's always been good.
It's okay. How old are you?
And is he the only person?
No, I
When is it?
So you go around
Oh,
to
it's
meetings
close.
like this?
Mine's April 6th.
I go around
Mine's
the
getting
state.
closer too.
I'm actually from down here in Southern. I'm from
Just turned 11.
Okay.
My son Gus turned
We're from
11.
Pine Island, just north.
Over
What's
13.
your name?
She was at the
Spencer.
CD1.
I'm Ann. Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Did
So
you
where
ask
do
the
we
question?
see?
Oh, you were the one who asked. Yeah, I was just talking about that. Yeah. I know you were mentioning
I mean,
asked the question.
it's for personal use.
You were just mentioning.
Yes, nice
You just
job.
told me the story.
Yeah.
So,
What is your group's name?
I work for the research.
My wife got a bunch of texts right away.
There's other groups.
getting engaged, getting involved.
I don't know if you're
Okay. All right. Well, very interesting.
We haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, jump in.
Well, we're now behind 5 other new people.
It's okay. I didn't know what you meant by that comment.
Oh, yeah.
What does that mean?
I can have you do mine. How are you?
Oh, good, good. Well, I'm glad you did. Thanks.
Here's another potential pocket person. All
Here's the thing, Minnesota, in the scheme of things, is really pretty good. We go through a kabuki, and then it gets thrown out, and then the courts do it. The ruling in Pennsylvania is seismic. Huge. We had a ruling in Florida, had a ruling in Arizona, the North Carolina one's in Pennsylvania. And we all know 2020 is coming.
It's been a busy week. Oh my gosh, you tell me. I
Democrats in here. My pledge to you is I am not gonna gerrymander in favor of Democrats. I'm gonna make sure districts are drawn in favor of
My husband's coming?
Okay.
Fair.
You met Kelly, right?
Yeah, yeah.
He's coming, he's gotta do something.
Yeah, that's right. He's coming. But yeah.
So
And then I saw the time and I'm like, well, I know.
Well, we would have been, we would have had
Oh, I'm looking at all my mess everywhere and going, it's just kind of busy.
The first session and
overnight,
see,
throwing something out
because
that
like,
was unconstitutional.
not all of it's gonna be
Picked
relevant
up
to
five
what
houses.
because
So we just reduced by 20% the number of voters, the number of signatures.
Yeah.
And if that
Yeah.
replicates itself in Kansas, it replicates itself in Florida, it replicates itself in everywhere else.
Something funny?
I love the shirt.
Do ya?
Can I take a picture of that?
As long as you don't publish it.
I won't. It's just, I just think that's
Oh yeah,
hilarious.
that is cute. Where'd you get that?
From Stand Up.
Why is it not working here? 1 second here.
Do you think orange lives matter? Or do you think lies matter? Do you think they matter, lies? I think they do too. I think they do too.
Kind of biding my time. I so that's kind of my.
Those are good cookies.
Yeah.
Those are good cookies.
We'll see what happens.
I'm allergic to
I know when it's warm.
Hi, Diane.
My driveway isn't open off.
All my neighbors.
Put a little of the city's salt on it. How's Helen? Good.
Everything you do.
You've been lucky and haven't managed to accumulate it.
But, you know, it's really interesting coming from a guy who drives a fire department, police
I made those.
You good? Somebody sit there? Okay. Some pictures? I'm going straight home to a big,
I met one, I was hoping to meet a couple more people.
Wait a second.
You can't believe this, can you? I rarely look like this. We had
I'm trying to get all the
I
Somebody has a big
Does that ring a bell at all?
You have to go down there?
I've been there once.
What time of the year were you there? One of my precinct chairs, like at this time. That's a good time of year.
It's tough for someone like me. I'm not a job. So, yeah. And you're because they pay for it, and you're trying to protect the times, right? Also being on and we have to be out with this license all day sitting and
No, I know.
I was sitting on that.
Thanks a lot. Hi, Laura. Nice to see you again.
talking to this guy. My son came to the airport and I was in the backseat just to listen. Yeah, that's when I would be on my own time. Yeah, be kind of a bad thing, but for soccer. Someone else. They need to be on. I'm not on. Just go.
I've seen you before. We sat next to you at the District 1.
They got a gigantic
really cool. That's a great question.
I don't really know. I managed to stay really busy. I don't go back and hang around. I think we're good enough.
August 9th. They're crazy. They're crazy. Roger, how are you, my friend? How you been? Thanks for coming out. Thank you. And the capital. Downtown today.
Right near us.
Now we got
She wants to feed them and help Moses work where she thinks that she well, don't let me keep you
We decided we were gonna work sitting down. So is this a full-time job for you? 9 hours? Lots of road time?
Well, I've heard some people going, let's get this party started.
I'm a school teacher, it's 3 minutes till, let's go. All right. Well, if everybody wants to grab a seat or stand or whatever, thank you to the folks for your generosity. There's some great foods over here. There is things to drink in the refrigerator. The beer is
In the
courtesy of Paul
refrigerator.
Thiessen, which I'm sure he would be glad you're drinking at my event, so go at it.
There's also a line up on the thing also, and for anyone who doesn't know, restrooms are through the door. You push the doors. Don't try to turn the handle.
Oh, there's a fridge.
Well,
I did look over this way.
thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy lives for coming. And as a citizen, thank you for your optimism in engaging and believing that we can still self-govern ourselves. And believing that the idea of free people gathering on a Friday night to try and determine the direction of their community, their state, and their country, a recognition of that literally billions of people around the world could only imagine doing that. So at a time when it can be incredibly frustrating, at a time when it seems our politics is incredibly small, it lies within each one of us to change that. We can make that politics as big and as visionary as we want it to be. We can make that politics as inclusive as we want it to be. We can make that politics as joyful as we want it to be. And I am grateful that all of you would be here. Before I get started, I just wanted to note we have a great candidate, going to be our newest House member here. So Jamie, I think they probably all know.
Hi, thanks all for being here, and thank you, Tim, for the introduction and giving me a couple of minutes to say hello to everybody. My name is Jamie Malberg, for those of you who don't know me, and I am running for the Minnesota House seat in District 25A. So that is a little bit of Pine Island, Northwest Rochester, Byron, Casson, Manorville, Dodge Center. And I have been here in Rochester since 2007. I moved here to teach psychology at RCTC. So I've been doing that, creating a learning environment because I believe that we should be cultivating opportunity for everyone. And so teaching at a 2-year school, that is something I do professionally every day, and is something I'm hoping to do in the state legislature, is make sure that everybody has an opportunity to have affordable health care. Mental health care is so important. To have affordable housing and transportation infrastructure so people can get between where they can afford to live and where they work. I believe we should be making sure that everybody has an opportunity to have the resources that they need to be successful and to feel satisfied and happy in their lives. My husband Ryan is here with me today. I met him when he was living near his family farm over in Worthington, Minnesota, so he's also in the 1st Congressional District. But we decided to move here after we married so that we each had opportunities to pursue our dreams. I was able to do that personally. I was raised in a blue-collar family in Iowa. My mom was able to work part-time driving school bus because she was married to a man who had a nice union job. And she was nice because she was home when we were home as kids. But at the end of the day, she didn't necessarily feel supported in her dreams, so she always made sure I felt supported in mine. I was able to go to college, go to graduate school, and do all those things that has gotten me to this position here today because I was able to have access to federal student loans and financial aid. And so even after a little bit of debt and a lot of hard work, I'm able to be standing here today, having my dream job, working for the public. And so those are kinds of the things that are important to me and why I'm running for office. I think our elected officials should be cultivating opportunity, not limiting it. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, I often say when we gather like this that it's the antidote to turning on the TV and being so frustrated. That was certainly a shot of the antidote. So, it goes back to that point, and so many of you in this room, so many old friends here that very similar to Dave. I came over as a teacher from Mankato West and believed that there was a different way we could do politics, a different way that we could include people, a different way we could be thoughtful on how we did that. And so many over you here called, knocked doors, did things, and thanks to you, we won that election, and we've won 5 times since then. And it's been the privilege of my life to serve the people of southern Minnesota. I took it as a calling that I needed to do that job with the same passion and the same dignity that the people of the 1st District live their lives. I think I've carved out a reputation in Congress amongst my colleagues on both sides of the aisle of working hard, of being fair, of being passionate about the issues we care about making sure those opportunities in education were there, making sure that we fulfilled our commitments to our veterans, making sure we were thoughtful and innovative of where we're going in healthcare. And when you represent or going to represent a city and an area like southern Minnesota with such innovation, that is critically important. So Jamie, thank you. Thanks to all of you. And I get asked, and I believe strongly in this, you watched what happened last weekend. You watched these shutdowns. You watched the decision of politics to pit one group of Americans over another. You watched folks fight over the smallest things weeks after we passed the biggest giveaway to the top 1% that this country has ever seen. And you saw the decision to make people's lives as political pawns. And coming to a conclusion again for the 4th time, not being able to pass a budget. Regardless of where your ideology lies, that's not the way government needs to function. That is not the things that we believe in. It is not investing in the future where we want to, and it is not negotiating or showing the dignity of the office that needs to happen out there. And I had decided last year of watching this, the big decisions impacting this state are going to be decisions made at the state level. The inability of the federal government to do anything as it deals with health care, to do anything constructive as it deals with expanding educational opportunities rather than restricting them, to see them do almost nothing as it deals with infrastructure investments, everything from multimodal transportation to broadband, to thinking about what the next generation, what the Minnesota horizon of the North Star is going to look like. There's going to be limited leadership out of that. So this gives us an opportunity, and I would argue in the age of the current president, it opens up an opportunity to do government differently. It opens up an opportunity to get more people to the table. It opens up an opportunity to let people see that they have a say in this. And so when I looked at that and decided, I think all of us know, we know it is absolutely essential. This is a truth for all of us. We must have a Democrat win this governor's race. And I say that not because they're Democrats or we're Democrats. I say that because the blueprint for what we're going to get, if we don't, is right next door in Wisconsin. We are going to decimate our education system. We're going to drive our quality teachers out. We are going to make it harder to get a job that pays a living wage. And the idea that you should have some dignity in retirement with a defined benefit pension plan are things that will all be under assault. You'll see an underinvestment in the research into our land-grant universities and our colleges across the state. And all of those things will come back to doing, and I really appreciate Jamie's point on this, is all of the things we do in this is to create a more inclusive community where opportunities are available so that people at the end of the day, we should measure our success in this is what is the happiness of our citizens? What is the joyfulness of our citizens? And those means how, if they have employment, if they have access to health care, if their children are getting quality education, all of those things. So it becomes self-evident about why we know a Democrat needs to win this. And it's not because of Democratic ideology. Our policies improve people's lives. Our policies give more opportunities. Our policies reduce deficit and debt. Our policies remove people from the previous. We need to, and I tell all of you this, is looking at this governor's race, all too often there's a fallacy that if we have the facts on our side, and if we put a better 10-point plan on our website, people will know and see the brilliance of what we're doing, and they will vote for us. If it were about having better ideas than the Republicans we run against, we would win every election. We don't win every election. And it's one thing that I respect in this is, what many of our, and our Republican neighbors know this too, these are good people. These are people that want things to work right. But they want to believe the people that they're voting for and that their government is responsive to them. They want to believe that you understand where they're coming from on issues. They want to think that if you disagree with them, you are not morally opposed to where they're at. You have a disagreement to get to a shared value. And I think Minnesota is one of those places that hope is still alive, that you can have inclusive co-governing. You can bring the folks in. The governor's job is not to sit at the head of the table on everything. The governor's job is not to bring the 10-point plans that solves all the problems. The governor's job is to be very clear about the vision of where we're going and convene the conversation at the table with the people who can best solve those, and those are the people most impacted by those decisions. So I saw today, and I just, as a side note, we had a rural issues congressional forum, and it was the 10 candidates, 4 on the Republican side and 6 on the Democratic side, that they thought one of those 10 people is probably going to be governor of Minnesota, and it was on rural issues, so of course we held it in Bloomington. So the issue at the table, or we talk about important issues for all the great things we do in education as a public school educator, I'm very proud, but all of us know this statistic. It's something that we know both morally and economically must be solved. We cannot have the largest achievement gap in education amongst children of color of any place in the country. And we need to start recognize this. That is not an opportunity gap for children of color. That is an opportunity gap for Minnesota. They are truly our future. That is the growth place for the jobs that we hear about over and over. We can't find people to fill. And those are the things that we will be able to focus on here, and we'll be able to do that. So I'm making the case across Minnesota that there can be a different way to do this. And I've run this campaign much like all of us here in the 1st District. Some of you remember this when they say I had the 4 young women who were my students ran my first campaign. And I remember when we started to catch some fire, the DCCC, the National Party, called and said, we're thinking about getting ready to help you, but we need you to get some professional folks in those positions. And I said, well, thank you for that, but no thanks. Because it's people who knew. And it was a lesson I learned early, including the people who knew best, including the people who were impacted by that, getting out and making them. This is a diverse state. I've learned down here, this is the 9th largest agricultural district in the country. It is the site of the single largest entity in terms of healthcare delivery of any place in the state. What a lot of people don't know is we are a leading manufacturer. We build tractors in the 1st District out at Jackson. We build tractor factories that are out there. We build every fuel pump for F-35 fighters in the United States military in the 1st District. We build, and we're diversified because we have a well-trained workforce, because our schools are invested in, or should be invested in. We have a work ethic second to none. We have a transportation system that people who came before us invested in. We're going to have to reinvest. We can't keep living on that legacy. I say this about Minnesota, whether it's traveling up to Grand Rapids or out to East Grand Forks or here, this state was different. It was different than other cold agrarian states, and we were blessed with an abundance of resources. The most fertile soil in the world, mineral resources, and a people and a work ethic that created, and natural highways like the Mississippi River and the Blue Earth and others. But it's been 40 years since we've created a Fortune 500 company. And Minneapolis is the 17th fastest growing metropolitan area. But they are competing against not just, we're not going to be Chicago, we're not going to be LA, we're not gonna be New York, but now it's Nashville, and it's Austin, Texas, and it's Portland. How do we make that? And I make the case as your governor, we embrace who we are. Quit apologizing that it's cold. We don't need to apologize for that. And embrace what we do better than anybody else, and start investing in that research. And when we talk about things like healthcare, we do believe it's a basic human right.
Yep.
We need to figure out how to get people on the individual market to get access to healthcare. But what we do better than anybody else, and we should start focusing on, is how do we make sure that healthcare is what people really want it to be. They want the peace of mind to know that it's there if something bad happens or if they get sick. But what they'd really rather do is not ever have to use it because they're healthy, because they have access to preventative care, cancer screenings, they have access to nutritional foods that are closer growing to home, all of those things, and the research that partners with private entities that are here, the Hormel Institute and others. Those are the vision that we need to start talking about. Nobody's denying there's things that we need to improve in this state, whether it's that achievement gap. We need to make sure access to that health care. But I think, and we embrace what we do well, we embrace our neighbors, and we start talking to them and making it politically and socially impossible to reject the idea that people should get health care. To reject the idea. Here's a radical, somebody said, what is your radical plan for education? Okay, you ready for it? Fund it, for God's sake. And don't get me wrong, those of you who are here, Jamie and others who are teachers, we get this. They talk about, well, we've got, what do we do about the bad teachers or whatever? Well, you know what? You know who really is upset with a bad teacher? A good teacher next door. Our problem here is not the bad, our problem is recruiting and retaining quality teachers. It's making sure that the job of the governor and the state employees and everyone else is here to be cheerleaders for them, to be there and know that this is a noble profession, and for us to recognize as a party, it is good for people to be successful. We are encouraging for employers to come here and working hand in hand. Employers know a well-qualified, healthy workforce makes them money. So I think as your governor and as someone who's out there and getting momentum building up behind this, there's a hunger to just make things work. There's a hunger to get away from the drama. There's a hunger, and all of you know this, this is the second reddest district in America with the Democrats sitting in it. You all know this story. It's because of you that a Democrat's sitting in it. But we didn't win this seat by pretending we were something other than we were. We talked like this. We ran that first campaign in 2006, and some of you were there at the time when they said this, the gotcha vote about when they were trying to pass the national ban on marriage or whatever, and someone asked me, and my wife was sitting in the front row, I said, my wife, Gwen is here. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. I can't imagine that government should deny that to anybody. And they said, are we hearing you straight that you're for marriage equality? Yes. I said, I'm for the dignity of people who want to love the person they love, and I'm more worried about building a damn road. How are we going to do that? So we know that those things can happen. We know it's about getting people out there, and it's about doing things differently. And so I just want to share before, and if you've got any questions, Jamie will be glad to answer them at that point. I want to tell you that the hopefulness that's out there and the vision for what we could do, but it's this idea of who should be there and what is our history going to look like. And I tell this story because someone asked, because we did things very unorthodox. My signs look different than everybody else's in that it's Walz Flanagan. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Peggy Flanagan. But the reason I was really excited about that, the week before I announced Peggy Flanagan was going to be on the ticket as Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, I was out at historic Fort Snelling. And I was out there because there was a trade group came in and they wanted to show them Fort Snelling. And if some of you have been out there, they have the historical actors in their traditional garb. And they tell the story of Minnesota. It's a proud story of a proud people carving out a life on the river and going out. And so they take you to each section talking about the history, the territorial history. But it ends at the Indian Agency. And the gentleman there said, well, this is a part of Minnesota history that didn't go so great. It's not so good. Our treatment of indigenous people mirrors much of what happened in the United States. And he's telling the story, and he said, and it's just one of those histories that is not the brightest spot of this. But I thought what's great about the history is, what's great about us is, we get to write the history going forward on how we want it to be. And so when he was saying that, I knew that in the next week, we would make a historic announcement. Peggy Flanagan, who is a state legislator from St. Louis Park, she was a school board member, I believe the youngest one in the Minneapolis school districts. She was the executive director of the Children's Defense Fund for Minneapolis, and she worked as an executive director and trainer with Wellstone Action. And well-accomplished childhood education expert. She is a mother of a beautiful little 5-year-old who turned 5 last weekend. And what I knew that day at Fort Snelling, that when we win this election and Peggy Flanagan becomes sworn in as the next Lieutenant Governor of Minnesota, that proud daughter of the White Earth Nation of Ojibwe will be the highest elected Native American woman in American history to ever be elected. When the critiques say the Democrats, and we do focus on bread and butter issues, but we lose our souls if we ever move away from the idea that this country and these opportunities belong to everybody. Social issues are all of our issues. If anyone's being discriminated against, we're all being discriminated against. So when I heard somebody say, oh, that's that identity politics, I said, no, that's called the politics of inclusion, where all of us belong to this democracy, all of us bring a piece into this, all of us have a way to make things better. And so I want to try and earn your support, as many of you have supported me over the years as your United States Congressman. But I think together, as Peggy says this, 2 things she says that I love. She says, we need to govern, make sure that the people most impacted by the decisions we make are at the table. And then she said something that this made me both proud and so hopeful of Minnesota. She said, Tim and I look like Minnesota. We come from backgrounds that look like Minnesota. We sound like Minnesota. And that is all of Minnesota. So I hope you can join us. We'd like you to caucus as far as you've seen it. I think this message is resonating. We're breaking away from the field. The support that we're getting is good. We have the support of people in a broad coalition, from Walter Mondale, Colin Peterson, to R.T. Rybeck, to David Wellstone, to the faculty at our colleges and universities across the IFO members across the state, to numerous elected officials who are coming on board. But that's not the thing that I'm most proud of. When we were doing our first financial report, the profession, the number one profession of people who have supported this campaign are teachers. And I think that, to me, it warms my heart, mainly because I know how tight we are. And so we are not known. I always said, when I was first running for Congress, somebody told me this and said, oh, you got a built-in network. You got the teachers or whatever. We'll be able to raise money. And I said, no, we won't be able to raise money. But we'll bring some donuts down on Saturday morning and they will work all day. But I got notes from people, the 2 that were my favorite of people who gave. One was from a gentleman named Eric who drives a cab in Mankato, and he collects his tips till he gets $100, and he donated them to the campaign. And then we had a server at Red Lobster that said, I want to just make sure that our state respects and understands. And she said something in her note that reflected where I was at, or mentioned this to it. I remind people when we talk about a living wage, or we talk about people and say the market can't sustain this or whatever, let's be very clear that the hardest jobs any of us in this room ever had paid us the least amount of money. So it is not proportional to how much money you have to how hard you're working. It is not proportional to the economic situation you're in to your work ethic. And I think it's important for us to be really clear about that and not let them message this thing, you want to give something away for nothing, you want them to do this or whatever. No, what we would really like to do is to pay people for what they're worth, for the dignity of labor. And I've said this, and they did it again in this tax bill, how can you pay more in taxes for carrying rocks than you do for carrying interest as a hedge fund manager? If you truly respect hard work, you truly respect personal responsibility, you truly respect pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, then pay the people who do the work a fair wage. And I think as governor, my job is to take that message. So I hope I can earn your support. I was with Peggy earlier today, but it's a joyful campaign that we're running. We're getting out talking to everyone. We know that this is a big year. Again, it is as simple as turning people out. This has not happened in 40 years. We've got 2 state Senate races. We got a historic gubernatorial race that will shape this state for a generation. And we've got state house races up and down the ticket. Because again, I have to be honest, I do not want to be governor to sue the legislature. I want to be governor to pass legislation that makes a difference in people's lives. And just as a side note, we have a special election coming up in Tony Cornish's empty seat out there that you see. So,
I got a clap, sorry.
I just remind people, I have won that district by as much as 61%, got out there on 61%, and I've won it in 5 of 6 elections. The only one was, I think I lost by a point or two in this last one. So when I hear in the paper that that is a red district, it's actually a blue district if you measure it on that, because of 6 of the last elections, I've won it 5 times. So I think what we need to recognize is our neighbors are not locked into this. Our neighbors wanted something different. Our neighbors did not sign up for what they're getting in the White House, and it's up to us to make the case who we are, what that vision looks like, and I think we can provide it. So I hope I can earn your support. I hope you're going to caucuses. We've got staff here. Eric is a staffer that's worked with me, that's coordinator down here. Some of you know Eric. He's been at this a long time. We'd love to get you on board. We'd love to have your expertise. Anything you can do to help would make a difference. But I think of, and after I heard Jamie's speech, and think about this, imagine the things that we can do that make a difference. And we all know it's 9 months away. Things can change dramatically. And it's not so long ago, just over a year ago, things can change dramatically the other way if we don't win elections. So it's not a callous position. It's just steely-eyed and cold-hearted. We need to do everything possible to have the resources, the message, the infrastructure to get these things done. And then we can do what's really important: improve lives, make our society better, move towards the future. So thanks for having me. If you have questions, let's do them. So.
Comment for you. You were talking about businesses in the first district. Have you looked at Ackerman and Living Prairie? They build almost all of the under the street or under your building boring machines.
That's right.
For the world.
That's right. For the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we all know that the only thing holding back many of these folks is getting the workers, and then affordable workforce housing so that people can get. And those are issues that the government can work hand in hand with the private sector to incentivize those things. When that tax bill left the House, it zeroed out the low-income housing tax credit. 40% of all housing that is affordable is incentivized by the use of that tax credit to try and do that. So there was a total disregard for this. So I want to be very clear about this. We have to start changing the message and pushing back on this. We can historically provide this, that Democratic-controlled presidents and houses reduce deficits and create the things that we know. One of the things on this of talking about being pro-business, we are that party. My colleagues, my Republican colleagues aren't lying to me when they say they're pro-business, but they're speaking in the singular. It's usually one business, incentivizing oil or gas or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
We're talking about a playing field that actually adheres to market principles and opportunities, and we have to figure this out. That will include changing the way we do education in our schools, like they're doing down in Fairmont, where they have Welding Academy in the schools there, and that Welding Academy teaches plasma welding and other things. These kids are getting out, and there's manufacturers like Ackerman, Agco, McNelia, that you can get jobs $55,000 and above coming right out of high school with no student debt, doing a noble profession that allows you to live in these communities, because it's about the choices. And I didn't mention it because I talked about that rural voters summit. I just told them you don't really have to guess how I'm going to represent an area that has rural communities in it, because I've done it. And the issue with it is that there are people have used that as a wedge. There are differences between rural and urban areas, but one is not better than the other. There are choices that are made that people will live there, and we want to make sure people are given those choices. If you want to choose to continue to live in Trimont, for example, here's stories we have to tell. Trimont, a small community south of St. James, Sherburne down there, beautiful little community, predicated on farming, aging demographically, as many of it is. It's about 800 people where it would be. But because of that, it did not have the capacity to sustain a grocery store. So this is where we have the irony or the strangeness that all of us know. In the most productive food growing area in the world, we had a food desert down in that area. And those who would say, well, the markets will do this, and again, I don't dispel what markets will do, but markets are amoral. They don't care what happens to things. They don't care what happens to people. So in the case of there, a market failure with no little bit of assistance or support would have meant they lost their grocery store, their hardware store, their convenience store would have gone up, which would have made it probably better that people would have lived down the road a ways in Truman and maybe commuted back to their farm or whatever, so you would have started to lose that. So what we did was partnered together, public-private partnership, super value with the state, and we worked at the federal level in the Ag Committee to get rural development dollars to help put that in. Well, fast forward now 2 years, you have a vibrant city center food market, super value, the town liquor stores there or whatever, not the anchor, that is not the anchor of the building. But it then allowed people, what we're saying is, to make the choice and follow their dream to live in a small community for the things that they find give them joy in their life. So if you measure their happiness, they stayed in the place they wanted to stay, they have access to quality food that's close to home, and they're able to do that. That is really what, and it wasn't this idiotic idea that it's private sector versus government, there's no role for this. It would not have happened if it had been all on government. It would not have happened if it was all on the private sector. It was smart use of those. And I think that's where we need to talk about people. The reason down here, Highway 14's not 4-lane all the way across. It's not because we're building transit in Minneapolis. It's because people that are going to be replaced in the legislature refuse to fund things the way they need it to be to get things done. When we get someone in there who understands that citizens are good people, they're willing to pay their taxes, they trust you if you get it and show them what it's going to do, and it serves us no purpose to pit a transit project that is feeding into those Fortune 500 companies and the growth in Minneapolis that we benefit from, no more than it serves them to not fund our highways that come out here. And we take that message out there. And this idea of pitting transit starts to get a little bit racist as we're knowing it, so that who's riding transit, who's not. We need transit out here. We know that. We need transit in St. James and New Ulm. But this issue of trying to tell people, well, the transit's taking your money. The people in Minneapolis are taking your money. We all know down here, more tax dollars flow from Minneapolis to greater Minnesota than the other way around. But guess what? We offer a lot going that way. So I told someone, there was a bridge down in Jackson County that we replaced. It was a little over $3 million, and it served 15 families. And people were like, oh my God, could they drive around or, something or whatever, go around on that or whatever? And I said, they're grateful, certainly tax dollars, your tax dollars help build that, but those 15 families feed about 50,000 people with the farming that they do out there and the equipment that went around. So a state that has a diversified economy and a state that realizes that when we're in this together to do that, we all benefit from that. So some of their tax dollars from the sale of those commodities they make may be helping move those people on transit, and we all benefit. And I think, we should probably as Democrats let our Republican friends know, when that train goes past Target Field, the next stop isn't the socialist re-education camp. It's not that. That it is not socialism to efficiently and effectively move people from jobs, and that's why the business community supports it. And I think as governor, a lot of this job is ratcheting down some of that, telling those stories about Ackerman manufacturing, telling the story of what's happening in the Twin Cities. And that's the thing of taking down that we have wonderful possibilities in the future. And I go back to that idea about defining who we are, being that bold north, being that place that is different than anyone else and carving that out. We are better positioned than almost any other place in the country, and we can do it. So.
First I want to say that I've been jealous of everybody in District 1 for a long time, because I live in District 2, and it has not been fun. The second thing is, I actually have a question about the loggerheads in Washington, D.C., and the insane things that they're dismantling. I'm retired. I'm on a Medicare. I'm on Social Security, and I hear rumors, chopping block just as soon as we can get to it. What can the state do to provide for the the safety net that's being cut out from under us.
Yeah, and this is a difficult one, and I think anybody who comes to you as governor needs to be very careful about not over-promising on this. We can take the lead on many of these things, I think, on education, but it's going to be very, very difficult. And we can do things on transportation. We can bond for certain things. We can make things work, but there's a big responsibility of the federal government to be a piece of that. And going back to where you're talking about cutting these programs, this is an old playbook that you go and cut revenues through tax cuts that never have paid for themselves. And I stand next to people who swore that their bona fides as conservatives is because they were fiscally conservative. Well, you just added $1.5 trillion to that. And don't anybody forget about all of the wars that we fought were all off the books. All of the cost of the VA was not factored into that. So they say, well, when Obama got in or whatever, we know that old story. So the playbook has always been, do the tax cuts, they can't pay for themselves, deficits skyrocket, and then you come back again in the new disguise as a fiscal conservative and say we have to cut things. And that always comes from the domestic spending side of things. The problem is there's very little to cut off that anymore. And so the issue is many of you know this, 70% of what in the budget of the federal government is mandatory spending. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, VA, those types of things are on there. 30% of the federal budget that we are fighting on over this shutdown is in the areas of split evenly. Military spending is half of that 30%, and all domestic spending. So all money to roads, all monies to schools, all monies to NIH healthcare, all money to the arts is a portion of that. The fight about this is they want to lift the caps on the military spending and drop the spending on the domestic side to stop that 50-50 split. And if they're not able to do that, the only other place you can find offsets they would consider revenues is to come back onto Social Security. And it's Medicare is the big one. Because we all know in this room, there's a simple fix to Social Security. Just raise the withholding amount up to what members of Congress make. To that number. No, it's true. It's true. Then it's solved for 50 years because that captures all of that. I did not know this until since you gave me the honor of electing me to Congress as a school teacher, I didn't even know there was a cap on Social Security. Because I was never going to reach that. And so that piece of it, so we need to have this, and again, I can't stress enough, this is my belief of being out there in the loggerhead and thing, that I think we miss this, and this is where the president was good about appealing to that emotional side of things, that we can't underestimate that making the case to our neighbors, to our good friends about why this matters. I'm not asking you to get in, political fights over the lettuce every time at the grocery store. But I do think it's important for us to raise our voice and make it politically untenable, because this is not a conspiracy. I just want this to work. If what they're proposing works, and some of you have seen this, I've supported some of their proposals if I believe they were the right way to go. This one is a real challenge. And I will want to say one thing when you talk about the loggerheads. When I first came to you after my first term in Congress, someone asked me, what did you learn being in Congress? And this is 2008, I learned to not say it can't get worse. And I learned one thing. But I tell you this as a teacher and someone who's now served for 6 terms in the United States Congress, there are 2 things that would fix the problem that we're in. That is, and we got a huge boost on this. If there is any bit of good news in the last year that we've heard, the decision in Pennsylvania on the districts. That partisan gerrymandering coupled with campaign finance reform. Because I'm telling you, when people ask me, why doesn't it work? Because in July, they did a story in the New York Times that said, you want to know how Congress is supposed to work? Look at the VA committee. And we're doing it there. And that's not an easy lift. And we found a formula there. But if you wanted to make the Congress work, you have to incentivize people to see it in their best interest to compromise, not just on that. If you're in a district, what my colleagues fear most is being seen as compromising. I told, some of you heard me tell this story, but I think I need to tell it in this to tell you what we're up against and why the 2020 election and districting matters so much, and why, as a Democratic governor, I will not gerrymander in favor of Democrats. I will make sure the system works fairly. Because we were doing a charity football game. Some of you have questioned my sanity, and I don't know if you knew this. I am the captain and the coach of the congressional football game. So it's just like the baseball game. But baseball with 50-year-olds looks kind of like baseball. So we play the guards, we play Capitol Hill Police, we get some pros that play with us. Herschel Walker comes out and a few of them, so we get the pros. And we put on this game. And it's for charity. It's been going on as long as the baseball game. It's not as big a deal for the reasons that I just said. It's not very fun to watch. But it's a great time because it's Democrats and Republicans. We practice together. We have a lot of fun doing that. We're out there in the mornings, and it's just one of those things that you want. I know people say, you people should be working. You know, why are you doing these fun and game things like that? It's the way that we try and learn from each other. It's the way to not. I do a Thursday morning bipartisan run. I run with people I disagree with on every issue, but I respect them. But at this charity baseball game, John Boehner was there with Nancy Pelosi, and the money we raise goes to the Capitol Hill police officers who were killed in the line of duty, to their families. And it's been going on now for 30 years. And so we were taking a picture, and it was Speaker Boehner and Nancy Pelosi. I was there with a couple of others, and I grabbed somebody and pulled them in. I said, come take this picture, and we took it, and it was fun. The NFL's there, you know, just this is what's good about America. And my colleague came to me and said, Tim, I need to get that picture. I said, oh yeah, I'll get it, I'll frame it up, I'll send it. No, gotta get rid of it. And he was serious on this, and I said, what's the deal? He goes, if that gets out in my district, I'm done. He was from a blood red Oklahoma district. He was in the picture with Nancy Pelosi. And he felt like that. And I said, and he's a friend of mine. I said, certainly, and I don't want to cause any problems. I said, no, absolutely, I will make sure that that's done or whatever. But I asked him, I said, do you think we've gotten to a place that's not real healthy? That we're all here together to raise on this? And he told me, he goes, it's just where I'm at. It's my district. I will get primary from the right if I'm in this picture. They will use it in an ad. And so, going back to what you said, what we can do in Minnesota on this is we can do fair districts here, and we can do state-level campaign finance reform. Some things that we need to start doing on that. That's a real bugaboo because everybody thinks, and even as Democrats, we say this, we're going to win and we're going to throw all the bums out. And I always tell people this, yeah, but there's a whole new set of bums that are going to be coming. Over. So anyway, where we go? I'll go over here back there. Sorry.
So I worked with people that were long-term homeless for 10 years. And when I first started, we'd have like 3 or 4 landlords we would go to, and they'd each maybe have 1 or 2 apartments to show, and people really had choice of affordable housing. 10 years later, when I left and went to a different area, the choice was, do you want this one okay-ish apartment, or do you want to stay under the bridge? And the apartments that are being built now that are affordable housing are $1,000.
That's right.
So as governor, what would you do to address not just housing, but truly affordable housing?
You know, this is the issue. This was the #1 issue at this Rural Forum. Some of you remember, I think some of you might have been invited to this. Back in 2008, we did the first Affordable Housing Summit where we gathered in the district. And it is not the same in each community of the causes that are making it happen. Here we know, because of wages growth, things like that. In Worthington, you don't hear this often, they would say, the folks out there say the rent's too damn low. Because the rent is low enough because of where the wages are at, that they can't, it doesn't make sense to fill, if you will, that they're not going to be able to collect enough rent back. So some of the ways we've gotten around that is the low income tax rate. It's not making a difference right now. Now, something interesting today, that the Republicans at this debate said the problem is because of unreasonable regulation that's put on these houses, and what we need to do is move some of that and do whatever. My response to that was, I don't disagree with you, there's some things we should look at, but I morally refuse to believe that because you're homeless or low income, you should live in a house that could cause a fire, or the steps that collapse and hurt you. So those regulations to keep building codes there have to be something. I've met with a bunch of builders up in the big cities, and I think one of the fixes on this is, certainly we're thankful that the federal government did not change the low income tax credit. It's coming into this one. The state of Minnesota has to figure out if there's something we can do on a state level to incentivize those builders to be able to do that. Because once again, I think us as Democrats, we need to think this one through. Is you would like to think these builders would do this because it'd be a good thing to do, but they can't lose money doing it. I mean, they have to stay into it. So I think the fix as much as anything, on that front part of it is, state helping do that, working hand in hand with them. I think that this is a multi-pronged, now with homeless people, and when you're talking this issue is not just Section 8 or homelessness, it goes all the way up. In Fairmont, for example, they can't get people to apply for their elementary teaching jobs because there's no houses to live in, is what's happening on that. So we need to start thinking about, as a community, what is the responsibility as considering that infrastructure that we need to be investing in, we need to be bonding for, we need to get back. But let's be honest on some of this too, is it would be helpful if people who are working 40 hours a week plus or whatever were receiving a wage that would allow them to live on, which means paying those rents, meeting into that. And so I think it's a combination of attacking it from a living wage, capacity to have things there, the state to use incentives to make sure some of these are being built. And then we have to figure out a way too, of when we have folks transitioning, we have a lot of folks demographically older people, what's gonna happen there? How are they gonna transfer? What's gonna happen to those houses? So I would tell you in this, I don't think there's an easy fix to this. I don't claim to give you a 10-point plan on it. What I do know is everybody's aware of this. And here's where I'm hopeful on this. The people most conscious outside of the people who are looking for that housing is the business community. They are partners in this. They want to figure this out. They're willing. So if we go to them and talk about how do we incentivize, how do we spend, how do we tax incentivize this, there is going to be support from the Chamber of Commerce to make sure that happens. So I'm hopeful, but it is historically high right now in where we're at. And it is in every city, it is in every small town, and it is in Minneapolis. That's something that binds us urban-rural. So,
Tim, what are your, first of all, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you. What are your thoughts on high-speed passenger rail or even slow-speed passenger rail between here and the Twin Cities?
yeah. Well, Spencer, make sure you send this directly to Steve Drazkowski. Because he will be working with me when I'm governor, so we know on this. I've said, and I don't think it's been a secret, I've always believed you explore all these options. I have been a supporter of the idea of being able to move. We have 2.9 million unique visitors to the Twin Cities. Many of them pass through the gateway airport of Minneapolis-St. Paul, trying to move those people in a rail system. And I am a fan of rail travel. I'm a fan that inner-city rail travel should work. The idea of truly high-speed rail of moving people, I think, is efficient. We even got some interest, and I think you would be more if they thought the state was ready to do some of this, of private investment in it. I have never been a Field of Dreams guy, build it and they will come type of thing. So I think you let the data drive it. I think there was there. I think you work with landowners who are concerned, what are you going to do with this? But those are, every time we've done infrastructure, those are issues that we need to balance against people's property rights, the manifest, or the property rights of what the state is going to do. But I think it's foolish for us to think that we have 320 million people now. By 2040, we'll have 400 million people. By the time my daughter is my age, we will have over 500 million people in this country. You cannot continue to build lanes onto highways to do this. It is not as an efficient use of that. We all know that the issue we haven't yet grappled with is much of our carbon emissions and climate change is coming from transportation sides of things. So we're gonna have to tackle all those. And I think the state of Minnesota, and I know that I've watched this quite frustrated as they've continued to put the roadblocks up, continue to do that. And I don't, and been there, many of you know the train issues I know well. I probably got elected that first time because of the DM&E Railroad, as we all know, of dealing with it. So I've worked at those things. I've looked at them. But I am still hopeful. I just have to tell you, if you want to get people thinking about the idea of rail, get the idea of thinking about innovation in high-speed rail, send them a picture, and I send it around, I tweet it once in a while, send them a picture at the train station in Shanghai. 25 bullet trains lined up, heading out, working the different ways, doing that. Manufactured in China, doing that, connecting people. And again, our East Coast corridor is too jammed up. It's jammed up with things on there. So my thoughts on this is, We would be foolish not to look at all modes of transportation. We would be foolish to not look at innovative ways to move people forward. We would be foolish not to think about creating jobs here. And we would be foolish to believe that we don't have to talk to the taxpayers honestly about what are the costs and what it happens. The thing that frustrates me is whenever they talk about transit, they want to tell you what the subsidies on them, as if, you know, everything, air travel is not subsidized when you get on. So there's differences, plus the social and environmental impact. So I have unabashedly talked about this. I was an early proponent of it. I asked for some of the studies and the Tiger Grant money to figure out how we do this and try to include people. And there's been pushback. And I value those landowners' concerns on where it's going to be, but some of you heard me say this, I think it's our strength and our Achilles heel that we can science our way out of this. Like one of my favorite movies is The Martian. Damn it, we'll get out of this. We can figure this out. The same thing, and I still believe that if we're willing to innovate and go in, and I think this is one of those issues. We have got to figure out how to move people. We cannot continue to build in a way, one of the other graphics I love the best is what happens here in 40 years if we don't figure out what to do with transit, and the entire city was basically one big parking garage. Yeah. One big 60-story parking garage to do all the people coming in. And so Mayo's doing it on their own, as we all know, as many other employers are, parking rides that they're busing in. So I'm enthusiastic about it. I think rail is a great solution to moving people in a way that reduces carbon emissions, that creates it. And again, I would be the first to tell you I'm a little biased on this. I just love riding the trains. When I lived in China, I ride the trains. It's a way to travel. It's the way to go. And I think in America we've got such a beautiful country. There's something about seeing a country on a train that attaches you to it. I don't underestimate the emotional sides of the decisions we make. And we're in a funk right now where there's such this anger. You know, I'm keeping, you all know, remember, I was sitting on that platform a year ago when hearing about the burned out husk of the American landscape, and I'm like, what the heck, I don't see that everywhere. And saw this idea of putting this malaise over everyone. There's things that we can do that we're better than this. You know, these are moonshot type things. Should be the people. I give you this is my plug on this. Next week's the State of the Union address. Our response is coming from one of my dear friends in Congress, Joe Kennedy. I'm not gonna plant any seed in any of you. Just so this is he is, well, you'll see. He's my guy.
I was gonna say, you talked about talking about farmers and small towns down here, and you've done that. You're going to have to talk to the people up north, and your Republican opponent's message is going to be, we're going to eliminate all the regulations, and we'll have hard rock mining up here, and you'll have thousands of jobs. You know, that isn't real, but it's the message.
No, you're exactly right. For all of you to know, when I first was getting ready to announce, smart people in politics said, okay, but whatever you do, don't get involved in this mining thing. So the first day I drove up to Virginia, because if you're going to run for governor, everybody was dancing around this. We all know what the issue here is. Democratic constituencies of people, and people gather to political entities because you have shared values. Not exactly the same, but you have a lot of shared values. So a strength of us up north was the environmental community coupled with the labor community, which was mining. And I've gone up there when I'm talking, I looked this through, and we have to follow the science. We have to do this right. But we do have to acknowledge that we're trying to find, and again, not Pollyannishness, trying to find these wins. I have said exactly what you said, Ray. I said every Republican, and I tell this to the miners, the pro-mining people, if you will, that every Republican candidate for governor is going to come up here and deliver a message that when I'm governor, I'll cut the regulation, you can start mining tomorrow. That should be your worst nightmare. That will ensure that you will never mine. That will ensure that if you do, it will go wrong and it will cause all kinds of problems. Those people up there know that. They care, and we need to understand is they care deeply about their water. They care deeply about getting it right. They care deeply if they're going to do this. They are not being reckless. And I know there's people in here well versed in this. Copper, nickel, and sulfide mining is different than anything else. It is very difficult. It can be very dangerous, as it's proven out to be. And you don't get a second chance at the most pristine water in the world, probably. And all of us in here know this. There is not one more drop of water now than there was when the dinosaurs were here, and there won't be one drop of more. It is a self-contained system that is there. That is true. And so you get one shot at it. So my message up there is that I pledge to you that we will safeguard those waters. We will use the science to do this. We will do everything we can to understand that extraction of minerals creates wealth. And I make this case to all of you. The reason we need that copper is the main component in the clean energy economy. If you drive up here in a Tesla, it's got 200 pounds of copper in it. If you go to a solar field, it has copper in it. And so it's that transition for trying to make it work. So my message to them is, we will do this right, if it can be done. If it cannot be, we will not. But I will also make sure, which they will not do, that your roads are fully funded, that your schools have quality teachers in them, that we get this right. And if you're a miner or an electrician, you will maintain the right to collectively bargain for a living wage in there, because all of us know that the first thing that happens if a Democrat loses this election, that they go to right to work for nothing, right to work for no dignity. They did it in Wisconsin, they did it in Iowa. It took them 15 days is about all since Act 10 or whatever went into that. And just as a side note, since Act 10 went in, the average experience level of teachers in rural Wisconsin has dropped down to less than 6 years. They are fleeing the state in droves. And it may not happen overnight, but if you lose your quality teachers and you lose your quality workforce, you lose your productivity in the long run.
I'd like to follow up on that then, Tim. Over 70,000 Education Minnesota members. Last election, more than 30,000 didn't turn out to vote. How do we grab that base? Yes. That's a lot of people. We should be right on your train, right?
That's right.
These are your people.
That's right. Yeah, be very clear about this when you look at in all of my elections. In all 6 of my elections, the Republican vote totals were very close together. They all stayed together. Some of those elections I won by 35 percentage points. Some of them I won by less than 5 or 1. And nothing changed on that. And nothing changed on my favorable, unfavorable. There's one thing that changed. The Democrats who didn't come to vote. And I think there's a couple things here. That's the only thing that negative ads do. Negative ads never really get you to vote for someone, they get you to stay home. So there's a piece of that. That aside, we can't control that. I was convinced early on and made a conscious decision. You go back and look at the history of this. It has been a long time since there's been a grassroots. Everybody says grassroots. They don't do it. That means hiring organizers, which means paying them a living wage, which means paying them health care insurance and getting out there. It's very expensive to run a grassroots campaign. And someone said, well, why don't you just do the traditional campaign? You know, Governor Dayton Governor Dayton had 6 million reasons he didn't need to do that I don't have. We all know. And I don't disagree with that. It's a different strategy. But what happened was, it's a different climate. And I come back to this question that's here is, that's our responsibility to engage the base. That's our responsibility. Again, this is a numbers game. We can have the best ideas. We can do all this. But if it comes down to our people don't show up, then we get in the situation we got into. So several things can happen on that. Organize and don't take it for chance. Those calls that you're making, the Get Out the Votes effort, all of those things matter. But I also think we saw in the last election, and I want to be very clear about this, Senator Sanders taught us this, you can also inspire people to something that's big to get them out, to get them involved in something, to understand that I want to go vote because I want to be a part of this. I want to go vote because I feel valued. And I would say to you in response to that is, that's my job. I'm making the case to teachers. It's been 100 years since a professional teacher has been elected to the governor of Minnesota, and I'm making the case to them that now is the time. Where we're coming from, get out to vote, know that it matters. And we need to tell them that collectively right to bargain or whatever, but I've told some of you, heard me say this over the years. I started teaching 4th grade. It's where I learned fear is a really great short-term motivator. It's horrible about changing behavior in psychology, you know that. People want to be more aspirational. So I don't think it gives us a lot. I don't need to tell you that if we lose, it'll be bad. I can remind you that it will be bad if we lose. But I would rather tell you, how about a future where every child gets the opportunity? How about a future where businesses are thriving, paying living wages, true living wages, and we are not having minimum wage debates and discussions and ordinances because we've gotten beyond that? How about we get to a place where people are innovating, and our discussion on healthcare is that we have a way to prevent some of these debilitating diseases that saves us money. I tell people this all the time. Think about this. If we could cure Alzheimer's and dementia and some of those, the economic impact of the cost to the economy that we're spending on the treatment, plus the lost productivity we got, is about $1 trillion a year. Do you want to pay off the national debt? Cures Alzheimer's. But you know what we're going to do next week? We are going to vote, apparently, I don't know how this happened, the president told us he could build that wall under budget at $18 billion. Now it jumped up to $25 billion plus an additional $5. So $30 billion. That is the entire budget of the National Institute of Health. All the cancer research, all of the research into any disease that we have. We need to make the case to people that if you want to know what the true national security of this country lies in, it's spending it on research to keep us healthier and more productive. And so I think, going back to your question, is we got to give some people something to aspire to, something that's going to be different. It's not going to look the same. And then do the grassroots. Again, I don't think it should be a part of this, but if you don't have the viability to run a campaign, if you don't have a viability to bring people in, I think the question people should ask is, well then how are you going to build a coalition to pass universal health care? How are you going to build a coalition to get some of these things right? So I come back to this again, this campaign and what we're doing, and again, people talk about inclusion, about making sure we're including, what are we going to do about people of color? Well, no one has ever done it in the history of this state, but now there is a Native American woman on the ticket. That's how you start to show how you're going to do some of these things. And I think there's going to be a whole bunch of people, and it was really moving for me. We announced up in Minneapolis at the Native American Center up there, and I watched, and there were two young women standing in the corner when Peggy was speaking, Peggy Flanagan, and they were kind of crying. I said, she's a great speaker, isn't she? And they said, yeah. And I said, they said, yes, we're really happy. We moved here from a reservation in North Dakota. Minneapolis has one of the largest indigenous populations in the metro area, and they're disconnected from the reservation and things like that. But it was so powerful to watch this. They were watching Peggy speak, and the reason the one was crying and they were smiling is they turned and they said, she looks just like she came off the reservation, and she's the boss. And I said, and both of these young women are like, here's what I know is, whatever it takes to motivate you, those two are going to vote. And they're going to vote for themselves. Because what they're thinking about is, this isn't voting for Peggy Flanagan. This is voting for, I'm going to be in a state where someday I might be the governor, lieutenant governor, and I can do that. And I think, back to your point, I think we as Democrats, and I love us for this, we're data-based, we're caring, and when we err on the side of things, we just want to make sure somebody maybe gets an extra helping of mashed potatoes. We don't err on no mashed potatoes for you. So there's a difference in the political ideology, but I think it's inspiring people what they see in themselves. So we hope we get your support. We're working hard to do it. Eric's here. We'll continue to drive this message. I know what my responsibility is to make sure we're there. And I always would close today with thanking you for the privilege of representing you, but it's something I knew early, as I said, representing you with the same dignity, passion that you live your lives. And I think I've done this since I've been there. What I always said when I first ran, it's not my job to give you a sermon, but you should probably hope that I try and live one. So that one is one that try and do what's best, try and be inclusive, try and be joyful. If you can caucus for us, caucus. If you can phone bank for us, phone bank. If you've got a few extra dollars, we can use them to buy signs, to get this message out and win this election. So,
Senate District 26 Chair, I'd like to thank Representative Walz for coming. One of these days, I hope we get that as representative instead of congressman. We've been working on that since. But, if any of you have not signed up to help with caucus, please see me or Diane or contact, leave us, go out to the website, leave us a note. We still need help. If you haven't, you're kind of going, what is caucus? Talk with us. We'd be happy to explain to you what caucus is. If you want to, as Representative Walz said, want to work on his campaign, do it. Want to work on Jamie's campaign, do it. Do we have anybody else?
Secretary of State's website and the DFL has caucus locations?
Yep.
There's a poll, there is a straw poll for governor at that. So you get your votes.
And besides participating in the straw poll, it is very important to stay basically through the end of caucus, because if you want to be a supporter of a certain candidate, you've got to be a delegate.
Here's the flow chart. And here's the great news. The state convention is down the street. It's here.
On March 24th will be
We have nothing to do with that.
will be the convention for Olmsted 25 and Senate District 26, and that will be at Mayo High School. And then on April 21st will be the first CD convention in Le Sueur. That's where we will endorse a candidate for the first CD, replace this distinguished individual.
Pretty low bar.
And then first weekend in June, we'll have the convention here. So if you can help at all or get your neighbors out, is we really are going to work more from the precinct level to getting the neighborhood grassroots movement. Thank you.
Deb, I learned something from the caucus finder. It will save you time at caucus. You put in your address, you find, it gives you your room number.
Yeah.
So you can, if anyone can check in, you can just go to the rooms. I took a little screenshot shot of mine, so.
Thanks, everybody.
Good.
Thank you.
We always need money.
No, I'm in the parking lot beside here, so you need me to pull up front, right? So give me just a couple seconds to get.
I know.
Right, you know, right. Basically, yeah. Well, I get nervous about planning something.
What's about?
For what? 25A. And then,